Can everybody see the slides in front of them? Just, give me a yay or nay if you can't. You cannot see the slides. Okay. So let's start. Can you see that?
I think it just might be me if everyone else can see
Right,
it.
well,
So
yes. Fabulous. If anybody else has any troubles during, please let me know and I can adjust or attempt to. So on the agenda for our webinar, I'm going to just say it sort of plainly. For me, dog play is one of the most fascinating parts of having a dog, is understanding their really nuanced and complicated social signals and how they all sort of work together to kind of create a really, complicated social relationship between, dogs and their friends, or dogs and strange dogs that they meet. And I am not saying that play is the be all and end all, but I think that a lot of dogs that I work with are struggling somewhat in their dog relationships because they are somewhat deprived from opportunities to play and develop the skills that kind of come with that. So my goal today is to really just analyze and explain what play is, what it's not, how to kind of figure out whether this is something that your dog would appreciate, figuring out their individual kind of play style, finding appropriate playmates for them, and really understanding what to look out for both, healthy and inappropriate sort of behaviors, and what to do really to set them up for success and navigate shit hitting the fan. Because let's be real, sometimes things go wrong, and it's better to be prepared and know what to do in that instance than to be, overwhelmed and caught off guard and, not necessarily handle it as well as we would like. So we're going to start just quickly. For those who don't know me, I'm Lauren. I have recently started my own behavior consulting and training business, Catalyst Canine. I've previously worked at Calm Canine Academy, which is, where I kind of came up, learned my craft, and I have gone on to get multiple certifications in behavior and training, and I really specialize in complex cases. What I mean by that is cases where there are multiple different behavior issues at play. Maybe your dog has separation anxiety, dog-directed aggression, human-directed aggression, handling issues, generalized anxiety, handling sensitivity, noise phobia. Like, there's a bunch of different things happening at the same time. And there's often medical issues at play. There's often quite challenging environments where the dog is living. And I really love that I get to help guardians who are really struggling on a bunch of different fronts, help their dogs to live and really thrive together. I'm currently based in Ireland, although I've just moved from the UK last year. And so I get to spend my days with my beautiful pups, Ash and Emily, who you can see in the photos. Ash is my sport bred 3-year-old intact Staffordshire Bull Terrier boy. He has really inspired me to kind of dig deep into dog play, because he is a dog who is very socially motivated and has a high desire to engage in play with other dogs. However, he's also not always the most appropriate player. He doesn't always sort of handicap himself and modulate himself so that enough dogs would want to play with him. So a lot of the things that I've learned that are informing this webinar really come from my strategies of helping him and clients, dogs like him. Additionally, we've got the little white dog, Emily, who is my senior girl. She is also really important in sort of how I've come to this, my observations and my positions about this, because she's the kind of dog who actually is quite inhibited in her social relationships with other dogs, likely in no small part because she is medically compromised. She has... Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Hold on.
I'm gonna mute you, Lorraine, just so
Yes,
that...
please. I'm sorry. I had just had surgery, so I got one hand here.
That's okay, don't worry. Hold on one second and I will do that for you.
Here, I got it.
No problem. Good that we get the kinks sorted out now. But yeah, Emily was the dog who, you know, had chronic pain issues since I got her, and that has always made her pretty inhibited in her sort of desire to play, mostly because she, you know, was worried about being bashed, being hit. She was quite sort of she had quite a big space bubble, and so the types of dogs that she would like to play with were dogs who weren't into body slamming. Basically the complete opposite of my dog Ash. The irony is not lost on me that I had very incompatible dogs. However, I also think that not just the sort of self-preservation behaviors of kind of wanting to defend her space and make sure nobody bashed her during play, it was also the fact that pain does affect a dog's attitude. Like, we all know, if you have had, you know, illness or injury, you maybe, you know, have experienced or know people who've experienced chronic pain, it actually impacts your kind of outlook. You tend to be more pessimistic, because when we are living with internal discomfort, we are, you know, our energy is sapped, our negativity bias is increased, because we have an experience of kind of something not being quite right internally, and therefore we tend to project that outwards. And so it's very interesting to me, the number of cases I work where a dog's kind of attitude or willingness to engage in sort of play behaviors is very related to how they feel in their own bodies. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go, but I just wanted to kind of start with explaining where I come to this for my own dogs. So a lot of people are really, you know, confused about play because it's easily misconstrued. It's something that is, you know, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of kind of like bits on social media and like stuff talking about it. You can watch some videos of dogs playing. However, it's often kind of the base level rather than thinking about analyzing the nuances. And I just wanted to kind of say, we are going to go into those nuances, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what play actually is. To me, genuine play is not as much about the specific kind of behaviors as much as it is a vibe in some ways. Like, dogs who are engaging in genuine play have a shared enjoyment and a sense of safety internally and externally. They willingly want to engage with one another. And maybe the least kind of talked about part is that they don't have a goal other than play itself when they're playing. I see often people misconstruing play type behaviors as play when actually the goals of the behavior is to control access to space, control access to resources, to diffuse tension, to kind of reduce the dog's feeling of being threatened. There are just so many different things that can look like play, but actually aren't. And so it's really, really important that we kind of investigate and analyze, is this genuinely enjoyable for both dogs? Do they both look and feel as though they are feeling safe? And are they really engaged in play alone and not something else? And, you know, this is what makes it complicated, is that within the same sort of social interaction, we can move from play to, you know, something else within the same kind of, you know, session. It's dynamic in the same way as, you know, with humans, we can have a social interaction with someone and it can change from light and funny and easy to them upsetting us and being, you know, worried or angry or frustrated with them within the same conversation or interaction. So it's not static, it's dynamic, and we need to be looking at it as something that's continuously evolving. In order to really know that play is genuinely play, I always try and focus on, is this exaggerated and is it kind of uneconomical? So what I mean by that is, are they performing behaviors, postures, or kind of signaling that is kind of over the top. It looks kind of ridiculous. It's not economical because it's taking up more energy and sort of effort than is kind of necessary. So dogs, like other species, tend to be economical in their behavior. They don't tend to use more energy than is necessary because they are trying, not necessarily consciously, but unconsciously, to preserve energy and use it only when necessary. That tends to be why we see a lot more ritualized aggression between dogs rather than overt injurious aggression, because it's not economical to be going around having like a bust up with everyone and seriously hurting everyone, because you risk being hurt yourself, you risk overextending yourself, etc. And it's the same in play, where we're looking for, exaggerated, uneconomical behaviors, because that's, for whatever reason, associated with the silliness, the comedy of play. And we do tend to see that it's almost like caricatures of real life, caricatures of predation, caricatures of fighting, caricatures of like sexual or flirting behaviors. That's what I tend to see most commonly when we are, observing real play. And as well as kind of what we're looking for, we're also looking for the absence of avoidance behaviors and stress signals. Some of these stress signals we'll go into in more depth, but we could be looking for and seeing displacement sniffing, where the dogs were playing fine and then suddenly they're sniffing on the ground. That can sometimes be a calming signal. If you've ever heard of Tura Rugas, who's a very famous dog trainer, she talks about calming signals as kind of meta signals between dogs that tell them to calm down or self-regulate or regulate themselves. And we see those quite frequently with dogs who are, trying to take down the play. We can also see other more overt stress signals like piloerection. Some people call this hackles, where the dog is, kind of involuntarily raising all the hair along their back. Now, this can sometimes show up, because the dog is extremely aroused or anxious, and it can sometimes be, a part of a threat signal, like I'm puffed up and I'm making myself bigger in order to sort of tell you that I'm not worth getting into a fight with. However, we're looking at a broad spectrum of different things when we're kind of analyzing interactions. So I guess a big point I want to make is, if you see one thing that is a bit off, but you see a bunch of other things that are really good, it's not necessarily going to tell you that like there's a problem. It's about being able to read a constellation and a cluster of behaviors and signals, rather than just like one individual thing. Okay, so I'm just going to jump to the next slide. So this one's for you guys. Tell me, why do dogs play? Why do you think they do? Because I've put a few different options up. You are welcome to, put some in yourself or put some in the chat. But there's definitely a few different sort of hypotheses of why dogs play in the first place. And I just wanted to see if you guys had any initial thoughts yourselves. I believe you guys can vote. Actually, I'm not sure. I hope so. Do you guys want to just pop it in the chat if you have any ideas? Yeah, bonding and social cohesion from Rachel. Lovely to see you, Rachel. Molly's gonna feature in today's webinar. Okay, fantastic. So we've got people leaning from bonding and social cohesion. We've got some other, Lorraine saying 1 to 4. I'm going to tell you that Lorraine's on the money. The different hypotheses are really about kind kind of it just feeling intrinsically fun. You know, when we engage in play as humans, it releases oxytocin, dopamine, other feel-good hormones. It can feel good for our dogs to just engage in this way with one another. It also is hypothesized that it provides an opportunity to rehearse and kind of practice skills which they're going to need in real life, like rehearsal of hunting, rehearsal of fighting, rehearsal of a whole bunch of different sort of important life skills. And it's all about building resilience and kind of practicing conflict resolution. A lot of old, culturally kind of sort of old school behavior stuff used to say it was about dominance. We don't find that to be the case in the latest research, so you don't need to worry about the sort of dominance argument here. It's gonna be really more often about dogs looking for opportunities to rehearse different skills, different kind of social relationship enhancements, rather than about, you know, trying to be a dick to one another. So for me, I think that there are a copious number of benefits to dog-dog play if we are able to select the appropriate play partners, we are able to select the right environment for the play to kind of happen in, if we have the skills to be able to support and help our dogs to regulate themselves during the play, and this is probably the most important one, if we also have the ability to teach our dogs when play isn't an option, and we are consistent in that. Because while there are loads of benefits, it can be a real problem if the only time your dog is exposed to and experiences other dogs is during these really fun, exciting, high arousal situations. I want my dogs to learn that dogs sometimes might be open to play, but other times they're not interested, and it doesn't kind of naturally happen that play just always happens around other dogs. This is often a big reason I think that some of my clients struggle with leash reactivity, because the dogs are, you know, learning from a young age in puppy class and whatnot. Every dog is a playmate, and then later on in life, whether they are on a leash and they can't go and play, or other dogs are not interested or not sort of open to that play, it can cause a lot of problems. So back to the benefits. The obvious benefit is exercise. Many dogs can get the best exercise possible from the gymnastics and the big kind of displays of athleticism that happen during dog-dog play in a way that sometimes other sort of outlets don't necessarily kind of compete. We can also see it as hugely helpful for dogs to bond with one another, whether that be in sort of social groups that are established or with unknown dogs. It can really be a fantastic way for dogs to learn a bunch of skills around problem solving, self-control and inhibition, you know, negotiation, risk assessment. It's a whole range of things that they're learning that if they haven't had consistent access to, you know, stable, appropriate dogs, they're going to miss out on. And I honestly, you know, I think that there is a lot of dogs out there who just are kind of socially awkward because they haven't had that good exposure. And that is in no way to kind of blame people for, you know, not necessarily being able to give their dog that, because I know as well as everybody else that there are a lot of dogs out there that are not going to be, you know, surrounded by appropriate stable adult dogs that they can learn from and engage with. This is, it's a unfortunate part of like the current culture in like the West around dog ownership and, you know, the state of kind of dogs generally, is there's not necessarily a lot of people providing social opportunities for dogs that are safe and are sort of well managed and regulated. I do find though that, you know, positive stress and sort of resilience building is a part of this. So, you know, I'm not saying, yeah, just throw your dog in the deep end and they get, you know, told off a bunch and have a bit of a terrible time, and that's great because, you know, they've got some resilience or experienced some stress, I think it's useful when dogs are learning how to inhibit themselves around other dogs or learning how to modify their behavior to get better outcomes. And that can sometimes involve, a little bit of stress, such as when an adult intact male gets told off appropriately by a female who's like, knock it off, you're being really intense, and the adult intact boy modifies themselves, stops being so incessantly licky or sniffy about their genitals, and downregulates. That was maybe a little bit stressful in the moment, but overall we saw learning take place. We saw, the dog realize, that's not appropriate. I still want to engage with you socially, so I'm going to modulate my arousal. I'm going to regulate myself and make better choices in order to continue that social relationship. So I've got a lovely video here of Molly, who is a wonderful client of mine, and her friend Charlie, the shepherd kind of with the piloerection is Charlie, and this is her first ever play date, or maybe not first ever, but first for a really long time. And me and, Molly's parents worked together to help her with a whole host of issues, but one of the big ones was her feelings about other dogs. And from the beginning, I really wanted to get Molly some opportunities to engage with other dogs that were safe, and we're going to teach her these kind of behaviors and skills that I've just kind of outlined. And also, frankly, to just get some of her yayas out, because Molly has endless amounts of energy and is just pedal to the metal kind of dog. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the behaviors that we saw there in that video in more depth, but I want to just sort of start by saying dog-dog sort of play is all about matchmaking. Some dogs, naturally, it seems, are just really dynamic and fluid in their ability to match another dog's kind of style. They can just read the other dog really well. They can inhibit themselves. They can sort of almost draw out the playfulness of the other dog because they're just so good at recognizing what that other dog needs. Those dogs are worth their weight in gold. I would say the majority of dogs aren't as adept and savvy, and they tend to have quite sort of particular consistent ways that they want to play, and that is informed by breed tendencies, age, health status, their gender and hormonal status, what their learning history has kind of taught them, whether the dog has, a lot of opportunities to engage in dog-dog play on a regular basis and are satiated, or whether dogs are quite novel and it's a big deal. And then finally, the pessimistic versus optimistic outlook. So what that means in more depth is, for some dogs, their breed really informs the way that they engage. I know a lot of collies and other herding breeds who are quite interested in chasing as that primary form of play, but they're not interested and actually find it quite offensive when other dogs try and body slam them or really get up in their space. I know for Ash, he is a kind of body slam, sort of wrestle mania type of dog. That's his favorite type of play. And, that's really off-putting to a lot of other dogs out there. And so he is not an appropriate match for a lot of those dogs for play. He can coexist around them because as I said before, I've worked on him learning that play is not always on the agenda. However, I wouldn't encourage or kind of allow him to play with dogs who were, not going to appreciate that style. And I wouldn't let him play with smaller dogs because of the size disparity and the sort of the risks involved with that. I think that, finding dogs that are suitable for your dog, breed kind of similarities or traits, is a really good place to start, because, there's maybe less need for them to modulate themselves and kind of, learn how to do it differently if they just naturally mirror one another. In terms of age, we're always aware that dogs' sociability generally starts to sort of decrease as they age. As with humans, when you're young, you're really open to everyone. Well, there's obviously a spectrum within, everybody, but on kind of in a general sense, children, young people tend to be more socially gregarious. They want to hang out with people. They are more interested in novel social situations. And then as we age, we become less interested or less motivated to do those things. That doesn't mean that there aren't people in their, older years, senior years, that aren't interested in going, doing mad social things. It doesn't mean that there aren't, dogs that are like this. However, I tend to find that it's a good sort of general rule of thumb. Don't expect your dog to be as playful in their kind of middle years and sort of old age as they were as a puppy or an adolescent. And that means that when you're looking for play partners, you probably want to find a dog who is, of a similar or maybe, slightly younger, slightly older, but not trying to pair up, a puppy with a senior dog, unless that senior just happens to buck the trend. Health status is probably one of the most fundamental. As I said in the beginning, Emily is one of those dogs who is, really kind of looking after herself and is not seeking out sort of potentially risky situations. And a lot of the dogs I work with, they just aren't interested in, the intensity that, just this video shows us of what play can look like, and they don't want to invite it because they don't feel good. That doesn't mean, though, that if we don't adequately help our dogs in terms of chronic pain, their underlying health issues, that might not change. So, just be really mindful. If your dog suddenly changes one day from being really playful with their their housemate to suddenly, avoiding that might be a sign that there's something medically going on, and you should look into that with your vet. Learning history is one of the biggest, I think, in terms of, why dogs can be successful or not so successful in their play with other dogs. It's basically that they've not necessarily learned the right sort of rules of play. If they have been allowed to play inappropriately, relentlessly, and never been managed or interrupted from that, they just learn that that's what they do, and they get kind of stuck in that. Some dogs, if they have just had no exposure to sort of play situations, they can find it quite frightening and overwhelming. And so really, it's been a sort of big goal of mine with Ash to help him learn to become more flexible in his play style, learn to handicap and inhibit himself in situations where he can't go full force. And that's about me trying to tailor and build his learning history to benefit his kind of overall social skills. As I said, novelty versus satiation, it's a big one. I tend to find a lot of dogs who've kind of got used to a lot of play that then lose it. They can be so intense when they get the next opportunity. Ash is like that as well. I had previously been doing play dates with his friends back in London sort of once or twice a week. And when we moved to Ireland, we didn't have loads of play date sort of opportunities because I was still trying to meet new people and find appropriate dogs. And the first play date that he had, which you guys are going to see a video of a little later, he was just bonkers. It was not his best sort of moment. He wasn't, doing anything so terrible, but it was way more over the top than I wanted to see. And that's not because, he's kind of ingrained to be like that. It's just because he was so aroused because he hadn't seen a dog and had that opportunity for such a long time. And I expect to see him decrease in his intensity and his over-arousal as time goes on. And I consistently provide for this social need of his, that he will satiate and he will become less intense because it won't be so motivating for him when he gets lots of it. And then finally, the pessimistic, optimistic outlook. I think this is just something to bear in mind. It's kind of like a personality trait in some ways, but it's informed by the earlier stuff. Some dogs are just, if they experience anxiety, for instance, more likely to sort of struggle to let go and open up. They're so invested in sort of self-preservation and worry that they can't really go to that headspace that play kind of necessitates. And so they can really struggle with sort of reading the signals from the other dog as potentially threatening rather than invitations. Okay. So, oh, I forgot to even break down Charlie and Molly. So the fun thing about this is that it's really interesting on both dogs' point of view. So we've got Charlie, the shepherd, who is got some piloerection down his back. I would say that that's partly because of his a bit of anxiety, I think. He's a little bit unsure, probably because this is one of the first occasions that they've played and they've spent a lot of time parallel walking and just sniffing together to get kind of acquainted. But this is the first time that they're really rip-roaring and going for it. He may be the kind of dog that just gets piloerection as a sign of arousal generally, but I don't, in my experience, don't tend to see it that frequently unless there's a bit of conflict or a bit of anxiety there. We see Molly doing a lot of really lovely, bouncy kind of behaviors. She's got that exaggerated rocking horse kind of comical behaviors that I talked about going on. And they are really just figuring one another out. What I find really interesting is there are a few moments of tension, but both the dogs are able to kind of diffuse, like here, that stiffness, and then they kind of peel off. And we can see there that Molly's like, okay, this is great. I can chase you again. I feel more comfortable when I'm chasing you. There's that exaggerated bouncy movement from Charlie again. And what I'm going to draw your attention to here is that Charlie's definitely coming to the end of his kind of like, I'm kind of done now. He's slowing down and he's not letting her chase him anymore. And we have another moment of somewhat tension there where he's like, I need you to kind of like bring it down a notch. And he's trying to leave, I think, but she's not really letting him. He turns and faces, and then he's going to lay down. And laying down is really clearly being like, no, I'm not interested anymore. And Rachel, you do a fantastic job of calling her away to just give Charlie a break, because he's been kind of trying to say, I'm a bit done for a while. But this is just a really lovely example of two dogs kind of trying to figure out each other's play styles and figure out how to navigate this kind of complex situation. If we find it hard to read all the meta signals that are happening when we're watching the video, can you imagine how complicated it is for the dogs themselves figuring it all out? So what we are looking for when we're looking for sort of an analysis of play is really how to understand invitations, asking to play, and cutoff signals, which are kind of slow down, ease up, I'm stopping, I don't want to continue signals, and really understanding what those look like. The tricky thing is that, you know, some of these can be involved in the reverse if the rest of the picture is kind of more swayed to invitation or vice versa. But I'm just going to give you kind of a general overview, and then we'll look at lots of videos where these kind of show up. So invitations can look like staring with an open mouth, kind of like, let's go, like just real like open excitement. Staring obviously tends to be relatively rude in dog behavior generally, but this is an occasion in which it tends to show up as an invitation. We can see the bow or the stretch. That can be, you know, the dog really sort of showing themselves fully, being like, hey, I'm up for it. Are you up for it? We can see some barking. It tends to be like short, sharp, like, like, come on, come on. We also tend to see some sort of stamping that can accompany the barking, kind of being like, come on, like really like, please go for it. We can even see an air snap. So the dog sometimes can go next to the sort of other dog or even at a distance, kind of be like, come on. And this can be really confusing to folks because we talk about air snapping and, you know, on the ladder of aggression all the time. But it can be for some dogs like just a part of them sort of expressing their frustration, even though it is affiliative. Sometimes we can see a head tilt, like I'm play bowing at you, but I don't want to be too head on, so I'm going to turn my head just to sort of give you that sense that I'm not trying to be rude about it. We can see some sneezing where the dog is just like, come on, come on. Body slam, you know, the rocking horse gait, the swishing tail wag, bounce and spins, all of these kind of exaggerated movements to be like, come on, I love this. We tend to see a lot of sort of ridiculous play faces, big grins. And this one can be tricky for folks because the difference between a stressed kind of like sort of like grimace versus like a happy lolling, like, this is great, can be kind of confusing. Generally, I'm looking for facial tension. Facial tension is what's going to tell me that it's more likely to be stress rather than like just lolling open, like, this is so fun, I'm really into it. I hope you guys are all appreciating my ridiculous impressions, by the way. And let's move on to the cutoff signals. Cutoff signals, I think, tend to be more sort of interesting because they can have, you know, a whole host of different kind of expressions depending on the dog. Often turning and facing mid-chase is a classic cutoff signal or a slow down signal. It's like, hey, like you're kind of starting to like be too much. And we saw that a few times with Charlie and Molly, where Charlie would kind of turn and face her. Sitting down or lying down, we also saw that one. I just realized there's a typo, apologies for that. Lying down. Sitting down or lying down are really classics, like, oh, come on, I need to stop. Turning away and trying to move away, looking away, trying to, you know, come towards the handler, sometimes trying to get access to their sort of safe space. Sniffing the ground, so that's one of those displacement signals of like, okay, I'm just going to pretend that something else is really interesting over here, even though we've been chasing in this area for the last like 5 minutes, and you know, all of a sudden this particular blade of grass is really interesting. Freezing and stiffness, which we kind of saw there a few times as well. Body blocking and splitting is something that is going to be more kind of between groups of dogs rather than one-to-one, but I will have an example of that later on in a video that's really interesting. We'll often see backing up or shifting of the weight, kind of just being like, oh, I've got my kind of energy ready and raring to sort of get out of here if I need to. Sometimes if we are, you know, seeing, you know, a stamp, a bow, and then a stretch, we can see that as a kind of like, all right, I'm done, I'm going to bow and then stretch out. But as I said, sometimes we can see a, you know, overlap with the invitation. So this is the tricky part. It's never going to be so simple as always look for this and not for that. Lip licking, which can be mean a whole bunch of things in dog body language. It can mean I've just eaten a treat, I am licking my lips because that was tasty, or I'm anticipating a treat. Can also be a way that dogs get the sort of scent particles from the air to try and bring them to their I think it's called the Jacob's organ. It's basically like a special organ in the roof of the mouth that allows them to process scent. But at the same time, it can be a sort of stress signal that says, I need this to wind down. This is too intense. We can often see dogs wandering off to go for a drink. We can see them even peeing and doing, you know, things like picking up a random item as signals that they want it to end. It's basically trying to say, let's tone it down, or let's stop. I need a break. Does that all make sense, guys, so far? Anybody got any questions just at this point before I move on? Fabulous. So we've got another video of Charlie and Molly, and here's really interesting because we see Charlie becoming, so he's got less piloerection, and we see an increase in the bounciness of both dogs. We've got a lot of turn taking, we've got a lot of bounciness. There's the exaggerated rocking horse gait from Charlie, but then we notice this moment here where Charlie once again lays down and is like, no, I need you to stop, and actually has a little go at Molly's hamstring. And I honestly would say that this is a potential sign that Charlie might be a little bit sore at this point, because I see a change in his gait as the sort of after those, like, you know, nice movements in the beginning, we see him slow down, he lies down, and then I almost see him like kind of hop as he gets up there. And I think this is just a really important one for folks, is that sometimes your dog can be having a great time, but they're starting to get fatigued, they're starting to get sore, And that may change their willingness to continue. And that's the moment where sometimes dogs can, overcorrect because they're like, oh, I'm a bit sore now, bugger off. So just be really mindful that dogs who are fatiguing, and especially if both dogs have a slightly different kind of fitness or kind of endurance level, always go with the dog who's got less endurance or less fitness or is maybe more likely to, be painful. Their sort of feelings about the situation should drive the interaction. And once again, Molly does a fantastic job of just listening after that little hamstring moment, and is just like, okay, fine, I'll let that sort of come to a close. Okay. Here we've got another example of some really nice play between two of these pups. These guys haven't met before. This is a Pomsky and a little mini Bernedoodle, if you can't believe it. And I wanted to sort of bring this video in because it's got a really lovely example of that displacement sniffing that I mentioned at the beginning. So we've got a bit of chase. And the mini poo's like, oh, that was fun. We then have this moment of both bowing at each other, the stamp, and then we see this poodle suddenly sniffing. Now that isn't because there's suddenly something really fun in the environment. That's because the mini poodle, Bernedoodle, was wanting a break. And thankfully, the Pomsky is extremely good at reading that and comes away no problem. Mini Bernedoodle doesn't have a problem with the dog. I think she just wanted a bit of a sort of down, like bring the energy down, and then they go about some nice communal sniffing together. But this is just a lovely kind of initial interaction between two dogs, which isn't worrying in the slightest. It's just interesting seeing a natural cutoff signal that a lot of people, I think, would maybe think is like, oh, they're not wanting to end the play. They randomly caught a scent. I don't think so. I think the dog in that situation was like, okay, we had a nice chase, and now I'd like us to bring it down a notch. More green flags that tell me that the play is really nice and reciprocal and that they're feeling good about it is that both dogs are able to engage in high and low arousal type play. What that means is, it's not all just slamming into each other, racing around high octane the whole time. It can look maybe like this, where you've got just some lolling around, both pups are laying down for the majority. And that is, really important for a bunch of reasons. One, when we see the play consistently only staying in a high arousal kind of state, we can often find that, the dogs are kind of tipping into a negative valence. They can get overly frustrated. They can, start to get, struggle to sort of see one another's signs that they need to take a break, and it just kind of amps and amps up. And additionally, I think it's not a great idea for, once again, dogs to just learn that other dogs mean high arousal all the time. I just don't think that's healthy, because dogs need to learn that sometimes we just chill out and relax with one another. Sometimes we don't need to be at 100. I think that, the other green flags that I kind of look out for is behavioral diversity. So what I mean by that is your dog able to do other stuff around the playmate? So if your dog can't stop to go and have a drink of water, even though they're really hot and need one, if the dog can't respond to cues from you and is completely kind of hyper fixated, that probably means that we've got quite a high level of sort of arousal, and we might want to be working on bringing that down. If the dogs aren't able to sort of sniff, pee, do anything else except this like relentless play with one another, that's not necessarily super good. Ability to respond and modulate is kind of like what I was talking about in the beginning about sort of the inhibiting yourself, having some self-control, learning to sort of assess and understand how the other dog is feeling. If they are sort of consistently not responding to cutoff signals over and over again, that isn't good. So the ability to sort of notice that cutoff signal and then respond and change their behavior, like, I see you've just turned away from me and licked your lips, I'm going to make some space. Fantastic. The inability to do that is going to be in our red flags. Now, the reason I chose this particular video is because these guys do a really good job of kind of highlighting what mirroring is all about. So a lot of really good dog-dog play is they kind of just look like mirrors of one another. We've got some nice bitey face here, and you can see they're like tick, 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 tick. These guys are litter mates, so it's just insanely cute. But you can see there that even though they've got bitey face going on, they kind of look like mirror images of one another. They're taking breaks regularly, and they are able to kind of respond to one another's cutoff signals, like that one at the end there, where the puppy kind of changed, the puppy on the bottom kind of changed his position, and the puppy on top was like, okay, I'm gonna leave you to it then if you are kind of turning away from me. And then finally, green flag, handicapping, being able to modulate how intense and rough you are based on the response, or based on the size, or based on the age and experience. The confidence of the other dog is huge. And any dog that's able to do that effectively is really showing that they're quite savvy, and that they are able to, potentially play with a lot of different dogs in a way that some dogs just really struggle with. Now let's move over to the red flags. So I see this so often being underestimated as a potential problem, because it's all play. They'll learn. If you continue to allow your dog to engage in these kind of red flag type behaviors relentlessly, they will learn that that's just the way they play, and that's appropriate. And some dogs may be bullied by your dog, or your dog, if you're on the receiving end of this, your dog may be relentlessly bullied, or there is going to be a day where your dog is inappropriate and another dog doesn't take kindly to it, and there is a fight. That's just the unfortunate reality. So for me, I do believe that dogs should be given opportunities to learn from one another, but I don't believe that that should be about inflicting pain, inflicting fear on, each other, because it's not fair for like an older adult dog, for instance, who's being kind of relentlessly harassed by a puppy that just wants to play, to be forced into a situation where they need to like overly aggress in order to make their point. It's not healthy for the puppy to learn that. It's not healthy for the adult. So I do believe that there's a fine balance of intervening and not, but these kind of things are just things to look out for and to be stepping in. Inability to respond to cues from the guardian, the environment, the playmate, or the sort of terrain change. Terrain change is like if you've been on a walk and the dogs have been playing really intensely, chasing one another, but over the course of your walk, you've now moved into an area where there's a bog, or there's, a change in sort of slant. There's, less sure footing, and the dogs are still relentlessly kind of going hell for leather. That's not great, because one, they could injure themselves, but two, that means that they're so aroused that they're not really thinking about self-preservation anymore. One-sided play or bullying, just straight up, it's not good, and I see this way too frequently. I think a lot of the time people confuse chasing that is one-sided as play because the sort of victim dog is still active. People kind of expect like they would have, barked or growled or lunged or frozen if they were uncomfortable. Yes, they might in the future, but we are really looking for the dogs not to be put in that situation at all. And often the dogs who are really not so confident may use appeasement type behaviors. They may use flight behaviors, and it can look like play when it's not. Little to no breaks, really important. Really, dogs should be taking little mini breaks, even if it's just for a couple of seconds, super regularly, because that allows them to check in with one another and understand, are you still up for it? Are you still up for it? Like if they're just kind of relentlessly going for it and there are no breaks, those sort of signals that one needs to slow down or needs space are just going to get lost. I often sort of actually teach my dogs to take breaks. as a way to model to them that this is kind of an important thing to do. Mismatched play styles, we've kind of talked about that a little bit in the beginning. You know, I just see too many dogs who are just not interested in the same kind of play, and the video that is on the left-hand side is a really grand example of that. Ash is just thrilled for Linus, my mum's kind of 8-year-old cockapoo, to want to engage with him, and he thinks that playing kind of chest wrestling boxing is going to be really excellent, and Linus is not a fan, and the video is so short because I stepped in to stop it. As I said before, one dog trying to move away or seek space or seek the guardian, displacement behaviors not received or not appreciated, repeated turn and face like I talked about, and if we're talking about group settings, other dogs trying to split and break up the play. So I'll play this one again with Linus, and you guys can see Ash just being his most intense self. So we've got some bouncing, and then we have our turn and face. And you actually see a lip curl there from Linus. He's like, "Are you kidding me?" And here Ash gets aroused and is like, "Okay, maybe I'll just hump you. Maybe I'll just like climb on your back. That'll make it better." And so of course I step in. But Linus here is really doing a good job of trying to reduce this sort of entourage, but it's just he needed backup, and so I provided backup. These are kind of situations that could very well escalate into a fight if you're not managing it. Thankfully, you know, Linus is the kind of dog who he's got a lot of warning signals that he's uncomfortable, and thankfully Ash has a lot of really strong skills that allow me to recall him out of the play and ask him to just take it down a lot of notches. But I think that's useful to note that if I didn't have the sort of level of verbal control that he has, I wouldn't have put him in that situation, because he would have escalated, I'm sure. Not because he's, you know, looking to start a fight, it's that he becomes so aroused during the play that he isn't making good choices, and he can't read the signals from Linus properly. And if the play is sort of kind of going in that direction, it's very easy for it to sort of fizzle over into threat signaling in the brain that turns into sort of a fight. Here we've got some other interesting kind of behaviors. We've got Sprout, who is a foster, and this little sort of cockapoo female who is trying her best to get him to stop, basically. Leave me alone. She is being really interesting in how she does it, though. And we have a little resource guarding kind of moment potentially there, but I'll let you guys watch this back, and I want you to look for how Sprout is trying to ask for the play to continue with the sort of body slam, and he's actually barking, but I have muted all the videos because I didn't want anybody's dog getting triggered. Watch for him doing that. He's getting frustrated. He's like, "Come on, play with me, play with me." And the other dog is kind of telling him to back off when she comes towards him rather than actually playing. And she then lies down and does a lot of head turning away and is really clearly saying, "No, I'm not interested." Shakes off to try and reduce stress. Those are kind of inhibited snaps, like stop. He's like, "Oh no, please, please." And she's like, "Turn head away. No, 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 thank you. No, thank you." Sprout is just desperately trying to make the play happen, and it's just not being well received by the other dog. This is the interesting moment there where I think both dogs here have a little bit of resourcey feelings, quite common in a lot of cockapoos. Cockers certainly have, you know, been bred to hold things in their mouth, and so there's a lot of dogs I see with, you know, resourcey type feelings around other dogs. And we see there the female dog kind of comes over, is like, "What do you have over there?" And comes in real low. He moves away, and then I believe that her handler recalls her out of the situation, because that could have gone a bit ugly. Now, this is probably, in my opinion, one of the most interesting videos of the bunch. And this is all about sort of what can look like play but isn't, and is so interesting. So we've got Barney, the border collie, who's muzzled. He's an intact male. And we've got this Vizsla that is an intact male as well, that's got piloerection. We've got two other dogs, one that is like the housemate, the Cocker Spaniel of Barney, and the other Vizsla is a housemate of the two Vizslas live together. And I think the second one's a female. So here we have basically some real posturing between the two men or the two boys. And we have some really interesting things kind of playing out between them. You'll see that the intact male Vizsla, I'm actually going to bring us back to the beginning to talk us through it. The intact male does not want Barney to go behind him or sniff him. Normally, a nice, appropriate greeting would be a little bit nose to nose and then go to each other's genitals and sniff. But this male Vizsla is just not happy about that at all. We see the whites of Barney's eyes there. He's got very, very exaggerated bouncy movements trying to diffuse the tension. People might say that's a play bow, but I actually think it's him trying to be like, I'm making space, let's be silly, come on, like let's not have a fight. And then we see him cycle through different behaviors of trying to diffuse the conflict. There's a little bit of a silly kind of comical fight display from Barney. I'm so sorry, this getting used to presenting here is going to take some time. We see Barney doing these kind of exaggerated movements. The Vizsla is extremely stiff. Barney's trying to do that sort of wagging tail to be like, I'm not trying to threaten you, mate. I'm just trying to get through this tense situation. The Vizsla is intense. He tries to chest sort of bump him. They're being very, very still. And Barney tries to do like a sort of exaggerated fight moves, the paw. The Vizsla is like trying to control his movements, and then we end up having a bit of a scrap. So up to that point, I think a lot of people could have looked at that and been like, Barney's just trying to play. Barney was trying to diffuse this potential conflict for ages with a whole bunch of different strategies. And what's also interesting about it is I think that the female dogs that were kind of in the oh my goodness, that were in the picture were also super interesting. So they're both trying to split. The female Vizsla is like, come on, don't have a fight. The Cocker Spaniel is sniffing like, oh God, let's just diffuse the situation. There's just some really interesting stuff going on that I think is really fascinating. I think that Vizsla was trying to split it again, trying to put herself in the mix to try and diffuse the situation. And you see there, Barney's trying to maintain, like, he's trying to move away, but he also knows that he can't not have his eyes on this dog because it's too potentially, problematic. There is just so much there. I could literally go back and watch these videos on repeat and find new stuff. It's just incredible. But the critical things I want you to take away from this are, it is so easy to see behaviors like the bounciness that Barney had there as play, when actually it's not play at all. It's about trying to diffuse the conflict. And the other dog is really uncomfortable with him, is trying to control his movements, is just like really upset and anxious about this situation. And Barney's trying to, use all of his tools other than aggression to try and navigate it, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. In that kind of situation, those dogs were not appropriate to be, continuing together, basically. It's just really unfortunate that, Barney's multitude of skills and strategies weren't enough in the end. So here now we've got my little idiot, a little kind of moment of him being introduced to a new female. You can see there that he's really, really desperate to get access to her vulva in an attempt to kind of gain more information about her. He's really, really interested in smelling her in quite an obsessive fashion. And God love Belle, the lurcher, she is extremely tolerant. You can see there he thinks about trying to mount her. And then her strategy to get this to stop is to run. Because she knows as a lurcher, she can outrun him easily. So she gets into this kind of running sort of move. She does a few turns and faces to be like, hey, stop it. And he responds to that. She does a like inhibited snap there, but he is relentless. And so, of course, that's when I decide to step in, because it is not fair. Bitches do enough. And she was too kind to him. And I didn't want her to get stressed out by him being so invasive and rude. Over time, he is sort of stopped being as ridiculous as this. But I just wanted to show an example of how even non-aggressive behavior, like very sexually motivated behavior, can be really rude and abrasive, and a lot of dogs can really struggle with it. So you need to step in. It is not fair for me to allow Ash to just go and be basically just like sexually harassing Belle. That's not cool. I don't want him to be learning that as a sort of normal thing. I kind of let it play out a little bit to see whether her kind of like muted corrections, like those like kind of turn-in faces or like inhibited snaps would kind of be enough, but it wasn't. So I stepped in to advocate. And what that meant is I walked towards them, I took his harness, popped him on leash, and I walked him away and helped him to just have a drink, settle down a bit. And then we actually moved to an area where there was more space, and there was also more interesting sort of foliage, and the environment was more enriched in order to help kind of make her less of a focus point for him. So we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, all these different strategies now. So in order for us to avoid our dogs becoming over-aroused, either because they are a horny bro like Ash, or they are, you know, just tend to trend in that direction. They get really, you know, buzzed by intense play and they struggle to come down, or they're the type of dog who is, you know, not really sure, not very confident in engaging socially and is worried about playing with dogs. These strategies are going to be what I recommend to every client about how to sort of help facilitate good play dates or potential social relationships. The environment is key. This is an unfortunate reality. An ideal environment is one where there is a lot of space, there is a lot of variety, and the dogs are not the main event for one another. So what I mean by the main event is, in that situation that you just saw with Ash, yes, there's like a paddling pool, but it's mainly just like lawn. And so it's very easy for him to be the sort of just singularly focused on her. And there isn't a way for her to kind of naturally get away from him for a long period. Sterile environments can be, you know, like shortcut grass in a big playing field. It could be an indoor kind of daycare facility. Generally speaking, we're looking for natural, enriched environments where they aren't sort of manicured by us. That's the goal. In order for us to kind of teach our dogs that they can come back down, I'm going to say treat scatters, cued treat scatters are my sort of most used skill. Can be a recall, can be, you know, an interrupter, can be a whole host of things. And, you know, a treat scatter, like a find it cue, or, you know, even just scattering some food on the ground, even if you haven't done a specific cue, for some dogs is enough. I tend to find it's most effective if you have conditioned that cue and worked on it away from dogs first, and then after, you know, working to build its potency, you then bring it into the picture. A solid recall cue is also going to really help you, because so often dogs are going to need help getting out of the situation, and they need both dogs to be able to move away rather than just one. And the reason for this is that, you know, some dogs, they are really trying to avoid, they're trying to escape play that's becoming kind of over the top and too much, but they can't, because the other dog is pursuing them. So they are like, I would like to come to you, but like, I need to keep moving. I need to get running from this like pursuer. And so they don't feel like they're able to come to you. Whereas if both dogs have that super good recall, then, you know, the dog that's feeling like they are overwhelmed can easily move away without having to kind of become defensive. If your recall or your treat scatter or whatever cues you're going to use aren't quite where you need them to be yet, physical management is a really good port of call. I tend to use a lot of long lines dragging in the early stages of play dates. I don't like to use ones with handles if I can, because they tend to get snagged on stuff. You don't want to use stuff that is easily going to knot and like kind of clothesline the dogs. Really, you know, if long line handling is kind of stressful for you, even just having a short tab leash like that's like 4 feet on your dog dragging can be super useful, because you want to be able to remove your dog without getting your hands near the bitey end, especially if things escalate. I also find splitting, like we talked about, the dogs can, you know, split between as a way to sort of diffuse tension. We can split as well as social kind of figures in the situation. So sometimes if Emily is sort of telling Ash, like, I've had enough, but he's not really listening, I'll just walk in between them. And, you know, specifically, I'll be walking into him rather than her. But that's a really good way to advocate and support her, rather than just letting her have to kind of escalate her behaviors. And it's also really important, I think, that dogs feel like you are actively involved. You're not just a bystander, because it's not that we are there to kind of tell them what to do necessarily. Their dogs are going to be able to communicate with each other, you know, far better than we are in lots of ways. But you are there to be the referee, and you are there to help them to seek shelter and safety if they're struggling. And I see Emily look to me many times where in the past she would have probably had to, you know, escalate herself, because she knows I'm there to back her up. I also really focus on standing still for too long. You notice in the video where Barney and the Vizsla had an issue. It's at the moments of stillness where the tension is most acute. It tends to be that, you know, if dogs are moving through nature together, we tend to see less buildup of that tension. And I, you know, really don't like it when folks are all just standing around watching in sort of a static fashion. I think that tends to cause the most issues. Many people will have heard of consent tests, and that can be, you know, where we take one dog that's really intense out of the situation, maybe by their, you know, recall them and then hold them by their harness and literally see whether the other dog comes back and wants more. Because so often when we take out the one that's really relentless, the other one's like, oh, thank you. And, you know, if we're not regularly checking that, it can be hard for the less confident dog to kind of end the play. Another sort of obvious one, try and avoid toys, resources, getting involved, especially in the early stages, because that can just add more fuel to the fire. As you saw with the Sprout video with the 2 cockapoos, it can get, it can just, you know, intensify an already kind of tense situation if there are toys involved. And I really I'm quite mindful about even, you know, pets, praise, and kind of feeding dogs when I'm doing first initial play dates, because I don't want my involvement to sort of signal sort of or create any kind of resourcey stuff. So I've got the video here of Griff, who is I would say Ash's best friend. He's known him since he was 5 months old, and they are best buds. They play very intensely, always have. We always like to call Griff a little submissive, because he just really loves to be beaten up by Ash and like relentlessly comes back for more. I, for a long time, really was like, oh God, I don't know if I can allow this. But I think it's been really useful knowing that just because he does it with Griff doesn't mean it necessarily is the way he is with other dogs, because I have seen him be able to modulate himself. And in this video is really an example of how the play can change during the same session. It can go from like we're both enjoying ourselves to suddenly not, and what we do to support Ash when he starts to get a bit worried. So here we can see Ash is being chased by Griff. We see that Ash's tail goes down. He turns and faces. He does a wee inhibited snap, and then Griff's mum recalls Griff away. Griff had got so aroused that he was being a bit full on, and Ash was like, hey, hey, hey. And instead of that sort of escalating into a fight, we were able to recall our dogs, do a little scatter, bring the arousal down, and then go about our business, no harm, no foul. It's really critical that if you're going to sort of allow them fully off leash to do this kind of stuff, that the skills are there. So there's that. And I've got two really interesting videos of two dogs that live together, Linda's wonderful pups, Riley and Cody. So in the first video, we've got Riley and Cody playing indoors, and what's really interesting about this is Riley is the female. She's younger than Cody, but both dogs have, you know, quite an intense play style. They tend to do a lot of barking at one another. They tend to do quite a lot of like bitey face, which can look kind of scary if you're not used to that level of kind of intensity. They do quite a lot of body slamming. But the interesting thing about this is that often I've muted it because of the barking for other dogs, but there's often a lot of sneezing throughout, and there's a lot of exaggerated facial expressions, which typically we associate with dogs kind of reminding one another, this is just play, this is just play. The exaggerated kind of facial muscles, and then also the sneezing, really good indicators. Cody being like, come on, with a little, oh my God, with a little sort of face glance away. And the taking turns and kind of sort of bouncing around and mirroring one another definitely tells me that this is like, it's play. The thing I would say though, and I said this to Linda when I first saw this video, it has the tendency for them to get really, really aroused in a way that I think can spill over into, you know, a fight quite easily with these guys. They do go hell for leather, and even though they are pretty good at reading one another's cutoff signals and kind of diffusing it, it is, especially because it's in such a tight space, very easy for people to kind of get a bit grumpy with each other, and with that level of arousal, it not to be necessarily read. Here, though, you see that lovely turn away from one another, taking a little small break. So it's hard because like these guys are playing, but they're playing in such a way that, you know, could escalate if they weren't getting properly supervised and managed. And Linda's done a fantastic job of really helping them to do that. What I love though is that you can also see this other example of them playing, which is super, super low arousal, very, very different picture. And this is part of the reason that I think, you know, these guys do have a really nice play relationship, because it can move from low to high and back again. So these guys are on the couch. They're, oh my goodness, they're just having a nice time, you know, kind of nibbling on one another. So it's kind of moving from grooming type behaviors back to sort of play. It's very, very cute, I have to say. We see that exaggerated kind of teeth flash, more bitey, some grooming again, and then back to nibbling, biting. And here is a really fantastic move, which I like to call hamstringing, which is basically where they get one another's back legs. You see this a lot in sort of dogs with high predatory behaviors. And what it basically is it's replicating what dogs do or canids do when they're taking down big prey. They grab them by the back legs to pull them down. And really, when we see that hamstringing, it's always quite high intensity, sort of aroused play, and I want to sort of be mindful of it, except in these very specific situations where everybody's laying down and they're kind of just nibbling and grooming, and it happens to be on the back leg. But you'll see in the first video, if you guys watch it back, there's a bit of hamstringing there from Riley to Cody as well. So there's just so many bits here that tell us that these guys have a trusting, understanding relationship and can kind of move between low and high arousal and are listening to one another. But it is really, you know, if I was seeing the first video and it was two dogs that I didn't know and didn't know each other, I'd be like, "Ooh, I'd probably be calling them out of that play more frequently and asking them to take breaks, because that could go a little bit, it could go south pretty quickly." I'm going to jump into what I believe are the really, really critical things to set your play dates up for success. Whenever I'm going on a play date, I'm going to have a long line. I'm going to have Spray Shield. Spray Shield is a citronella spray that is super, super useful for basically warding off off-leash dogs who might charge you, but also for breaking up dog fights. It's not going to harm them. It's not going to sort of lead to any lasting harm, but it is going to hopefully stop things in their tracks, because citronella spray is not pleasant to get in your eyes or your face. If the dog has an unknown history with other dogs or has a history of arousal tipping into aggression, I'm going to think about muzzling. I'm also going to make sure that water is always available. This is so under kind of talked about, I think. Access to water is critical when they are exercising that intensely by sort of the chasing and the playing. They can get really hot. And if they are feeling any conflict or stress, that's also going to raise their body temperature, because the body is adrenalized and prepared. And so we want to make sure water is always available, and you have more than one water source, because you don't want that to become a conflict or a source of conflict. You're also going to have cookies, because ultimately, if anybody's showing up to my webinar, they're probably aware that I'm a positive reinforcement oriented trainer. So I'm going to be using a lot of food to help our dogs to calm down and regulate or reinforce behaviors that I like. Okay. So what to do when your dog is in a situation that turns south, how to stop the sort of escalation of an altercation or a fight. Number one, and this is going to feel really counterintuitive, stay calm. Significant injury between dogs is actually a lot less common than we might think. Like, ritualized aggression, as I said in the beginning, is the most economical route. It does not serve for dogs to go out and have sort of duels to the death. It just is not good. It's not worthwhile for them. So it's very, you know, uncommon for them to have really serious injuries. And the majority of severe injuries tend to be between two females. We lovingly understand bitches leave stitches. The research kind of just consistently shows that female aggression tends to be the most intense, and that's part of the reason that I often try and choose sort of cross-sex pairings whenever I'm starting out with introducing another dog to another and trying to set up these kind of potential social situations. I want to say that, you know, being mindful of how our interventions can either help or hinder is really important, because sometimes I've seen folks in, you know, situations where dogs are starting to escalate and there is some screaming, there is some kind of like very panicked responses, or trying to just dive in with your hands, and that can sometimes just make everything worse. I tend to focus on using a deep, you know, assertive voice to just be like, "Hey, cut it out," like really deep and assertive. And I try and use my long line, maybe, spray shield if it really looks like it's going to be necessary. But often, utilizing your long line and being like, hey, and then helping the dogs move away and down regulate is, all that's necessary. I will say that, and I'm going to put in the sort of recording, kind of the notes that come out with the recording for this, there are some specific techniques for handling proper fights, and I will link to a resource for that. But the most critical thing for me is just, try not to get involved with your hands, because that's how redirected bites happen, and that can be really serious. I know several guardians who have, had serious, injuries from trying to break up dog fights, and most of the time that could have been avoided with the use of, spray shield or some extra safety layers like the long lines or the muzzle before. Okay, we have got to the fun part, in my opinion, which is you guys get to ask me questions. I see Lorraine's already put in, can you address shoulder over? Shoulder over is really interesting because it's one of those behaviors that is typically pretty clearly antagonistic. We see it, Ash was doing sort of his shoulder over her hind end, which is typically more sexual. Shoulder over another dog's shoulder is really, very classically a problem, and it typically is a precursor to like a fight starting. So I am very conscious anytime I see what I think is like a dog putting their head over another dog's shoulder and looking as though they're trying to kind of go over that way. Typically, the dog is gonna the one that's receiving it is gonna escalate, being like, hey, what the hell? Or the one that's actually doing it is going to start a fight very quickly. So if you ever start to see that kind of shoulder over stuff, intervene fast, intervene with, recall if you can, long line if necessary, and don't worry that, don't underestimate that that's a really important one. Emily, I wanted to answer your question about musculoskeletal pain as well at this point. So number one, how do you find an appropriate socially savvy dog? My go-to is, without my dog, taking a trip to, a dog kind of populated area, maybe cafes, maybe other dog parks, maybe other parks around, and looking around for dogs who I see navigating social situations with other dogs regularly and with ease. That tends to be, a little bit like looking for like a needle in a haystack, but it can be done. And I have found a lot of appropriate dogs this way. I'm looking at the dogs and I'm saying, are you really OTT, or are you very like calm, comfortable, observing, assessing sort of the situation without getting, too frustrated or too worried? Are you just calmly, confidently taking it in? And then if I see that dog, I will then go up to the person and be like, hey, I just want to tell you, your dog is amazing. I think your dog is so socially savvy. Would it be possible for me to maybe try and introduce my dog to your dog sometime? I'd love to buy you a coffee and we go for a walk together. Because I find those dogs, they are sort of unsung heroes, and the guardian don't always know that they have such a fabulous dog. And so they love to hear about how their dog is, so lovely and wonderful. And that can be a really, nice way to kind of start that process. Another thing is to honestly just reach out to in-person dog trainers or behavior consultants and ask them, do they have specific dogs that they use in their kind of dog rehab work? And do they offer, social remedial socialization or social walks or anything like that? That's what I've done when I've moved to Ireland to find dogs that were appropriate with Ash. I was just like, okay, I'm going to talk to all the dog trainers around me and be like, hey, do you have any particular dogs that you think would be a suitable kind of playmate for my guy? Putting yourself out there and being really honest about what your dog's skills are and what you're looking for is critical. And honestly, the worst thing that can happen is someone says no. You've tried. It's not, it's not the end of the world. Any other questions? Humping thoughts. Oh, I have so many thoughts about this, Lorraine. Someone who's sitting next to me loves to hump if he is over-aroused. I think that, humping is a few things. Can be sexual. In the case with Ash in that lurcher, it was definitely sexually motivated. He had big stud boy thoughts and was like, oh my goodness, you're not spayed, but I could still, have a great time with you. So you are spayed, but I could still, try and make sweet love to you. Can also be a sign of over-arousal, or a sign that the dog is just overstimulated and it needs to have a break. It can also be a sign that the dog actually is very uncomfortable from like an anxiety point of view and is trying to create distance. So I see some dogs that they hump other dogs that make them nervous and uncomfortable, or hump people. Like the first time that Ash ever humped someone, it was an older man who was really not super receptive to like his signals. And that isn't just him being like, he didn't have sexy thoughts about that man. He just was uncomfortable with that man, and that was his way of expressing it. So be mindful that it's not just sexual. It's not just necessarily kind of overstimulation. It can also be distance seeking behavior. Just, the irony that it's like, can I get as close to you as possible to increase distance from you? But yes, I find humping stuff very, very interesting. One thing I have noticed as well is that a lot of the time, dogs who, have like a sudden surge in humping or other kind of over-arousal behaviors, it can sometimes be linked to pain as well. Ash's humping started after his iliopsoas injury, and I do think that they were very tied to one another, probably because he was feeling less confident and comfortable in himself, and so he was more sensitive to those external factors from the folks. Okay, anybody else? And you're also welcome to, unmute and put your camera on, and we can have a chat about it rather than just in the Emily, you're so good for reminding me, than in the written chat. So Emily asked a really fabulous question on stories and Instagram when I was kind of talking about this, basically about how and whether it is a good idea to allow your dog who has musculoskeletal issues to engage with other dogs in dog-dog play. And as you can imagine, it depends. Depending on your dog's desire and motivation to play. If this dog, for instance, when Ash was injured and he was sore, I still needed to provide him social outlets, but I had to be really mindful about setting him up so that he wasn't going to re-injure himself or aggravate his pain. So what we would do is I'd be taking him out with Griff and we'd walk on leash for like an hour so that they were getting their yayas out. And then I would maybe allow them to have like a very small kind of romp together. And then I would call them away. Now, lots of vets and physios and whatnot will just be like straight up no. I think it really depends on your situation and what your team tells you. If you've got a dog that has spinal issues, for instance, the risk is just probably way too high. Whereas with Ash, with like a pulled muscle, yes, there's a risk that he could like set us back in his recovery. But I also needed to sort of make a cost benefit analysis of his mental welfare versus the risk involved by engaging in that. I also think it's determined on, how your dog plays. If they play in a really high voltage way, there's going to be bigger risks than if your dog tends to have a very sort of relaxed and very chill, bitey face on the floor. They're less likely to injure themselves significantly doing that. And then the other piece is how well is your dog's play partner able to read signals, inhibit themselves. I would never, for instance, put another dog that's in pain with Ash to play. Like I do not allow Emily and Ash to play because I know that he is going to make a mistake and it's going to hurt her. So I'm just not going to, I'm not going to allow him to practice that. There are other dogs out there that are better fit. On the other hand, I know certain, collies that would probably be a good fit for playing with Emily because they would never touch her. It would be like chase, no body slams, no touching. And she could modulate herself because she's highly, self-preserving in a way that Ash isn't. I hope that's helpful, Emily. Tell me if you have any follow-up questions to that or anything that I've said that doesn't make sense. Okay, fabulous. All right, so I am curious if there are any other questions, because if there are, please do, let me know, because I've definitely gone over time, but I want to address anything that people, are still curious about. Could talk play all day. Thanks. Sorry to be off camera post surgery. Only one more. Oh, I'm so glad that it was helpful for you, Lorraine, and I'm hope that your surgery recovery is going really well. I guess then I'm going to finish up by just letting you guys know that I'm hoping to do more webinars as I go forward with this new business, because I honestly love talking about this stuff. I love engaging with your questions. I love giving kind of deep dives into things that fascinate me. And I basically want to hear if you have different topics that you would like sort of these kind of things around. I'm also going to ask you guys if you are interested or needing support on this, and you're struggling with dog play or any other kind of issues, feel free to reach out about private coaching, because I have some clients and former clients in the call. Thank you so much for being here. But these are issues that we can work on, and these are issues that don't have to stay static and sort of stagnant. It is a process, and I'm also just super excited to provide more and more education around this stuff. But I'll finish up there because I've gone over time, and I just really want to say thank you to everybody for coming and your fantastic questions. I will be sending out the recording tomorrow and the sort of fight diffusing information that I mentioned as well, and I will also be sending out like a transcription, like an AI transcription, so that folks can like jump to bits that were really important to them as well. But you guys have been fantastic, and I really hope that you all have a lovely rest of your weekend. Bye.